Have you ever walked into a room and known without a single word that you weren't wanted there? That's what it felt like when Cassidy stepped into the hotel conference suite. The air was too cold, like the AC had been set deliberately to freeze out anything human. No floral arrangements, no music, no slideshow of memories, just rows of metal chairs and lukewarm coffee in paper cups. More boardroom than memorial. She walked in wearing her full Air Force dress uniform, not to impress anyone, but because her father would have expected it. Her boots echoed on the marble tile. Her ribbons shifted slightly with each step. Not a single head turned. No one stood. No one even glanced her way. And in the middle of it all, seated like she owned the oxygen, was Leona Wynne, arms crossed, tailored navy blazer, tablet in hand, lipstick untouched. Leona didn't flinch. She didn't even lift her chin. She just murmured, "Cassidy," as if reciting a dull item on a list. Milk bread eggs, estranged sister in uniform. Cassidy had crossed an ocean to be here. Leona didn't even look up. She stood for a moment, unsure where to go. No ushers, no eye contact, just cold shoulders and blank screens. So she sat in the back row near the exit like a visitor, not family. Someone coughed, someone stirred their coffee, but not a single person said her name again. Cassidy glanced at the front of the room. There was a photo of her father next to a sealed envelope, his will. No flags, no folded ones at least. No mention of his military past, no mention of hers. She was a soldier in a room where nothing needed defending. And yet somehow she'd never felt more under attack. The reading of a will is supposed to feel heavy, like the final breath of someone who meant something. But this felt more like a business transaction. The attorney cleared his throat. He was tall, stiff, and wore a tie that looked more expensive than the coffee they were serving. Behind him, a single sheet of paper rested on a clipboard, 1 page. That's all it took to dismantle a lifetime. He began reading with no emotion. Per the final testament of James Wine, Leona crossed her legs tighter, already smiling. Cassidy sat frozen, eyes locked on that clipboard. Her heart didn't race, it just dropped. All real estate investments and liquid accounts shall be transferred to Leona Wynne. Leona didn't react. She expected it. She had already won. The attorney paused, then added, "Cassidy Wynne shall receive the following personal item, a sealed envelope left at her father's request." That was it. Cassidy blinked. Once, then again. No land, no inheritance, not even his old watch. Just a yellowed envelope with her name written in pen. Inside, a faded photo from 1975. And a military challenge coin from the Korean War. Her father, standing next to a fighter jet, smiling in black and white. The room stayed silent. No gasp, no protest, just Leona turning back to her tablet like the whole thing was a minor email notification. No one asked why. No one looked at Cassidy like this was normal. But it wasn't. It was elegant, it was quiet, and it was surgical. This wasn't just an oversight. It was exile dressed in designer civility. At first, she almost didn't open it. The envelope sat heavy in her hand, not because of weight, but because of what it might not contain. No apology, no final words, just her name in her father's handwriting, blocky, neat, unmistakably his. Cassidy peeled it open with military precision. Inside was a photograph, old, faded. Her father, James Wynne, standing beside a fighter jet, one arm slung across the intake like it was part of him. His other hand gripped something small, metallic. And then it fell into her palm, the coin. A U.S. military challenge coin, aged with time but still sharp around the edges. Stamped with an insignia she recognized instantly, a squadron that no longer existed. Her breath caught. This wasn't a random keepsake. This was intentional. She flipped the coin over. Etched into the back, barely visible through years of wear, was a phrase in Latin. Non sibi sed patriae. Not for self, but for country. That's when the tremble started, not from fear, but from memory. She remembered being 8, sitting on the floor of her father's garage, watching him polish his metals in silence. He never talked about war, never bragged. But that coin, it never left his jacket, until now. He didn't give her a fortune. He gave her a fingerprint. And maybe, just maybe, he knew what Leona was doing, knew what Cassidy had become. He couldn't stop the will from being rewritten. But he could leave a message no one else would understand. There's nothing more uncomfortable than being trapped beside someone who doesn't see you as family, except maybe being trapped beside someone who used to. Cassidy stood in line at the Lisbon airport, boarding pass in hand, first class, courtesy of Leona. Not kindness, optics. People would talk, Leona had said. 2 sisters flying home from their father's funeral on separate tickets. That's bad press. No mention of closure. No gesture of reconciliation. Just image control. The gate agent smiled. Seats 14A and 14C, business class. They walked together in silence. Cassidy felt like a guest in her own grief. When they reached their row, Leona slid into the window seat without asking. Cassidy took the aisle. Between them, an empty seat. Symbolic? Maybe. Or maybe Leona didn't want Cassidy's elbow brushing her designer blouse. They buckled in. Leona immediately pulled out her iPad, AirPods in, and wall up. Cassidy stared straight ahead. The safety video played, but she wasn't watching. She was thinking, how did we get here? How did 2 girls who used to share bunk beds end up worlds apart on the same flight? Blood makes you related. Behavior decides if you're actually family. The plane began to taxi. Cassidy felt the hum of the engines, steady, predictable, almost comforting. Unlike the silence between her and Leona, which was thick, artificial, and louder than any turbulence. The worst kind of insult doesn't sound like a shout. It sounds like a compliment that bites. Leona had mastered that art. 10 minutes into the flight, cabin lights dimmed, flight attendants rolled past with wine and napkins. Leona finally took out her AirPods. She glanced over at Cassidy just long enough to make it feel like a conversation, but not long enough to be sincere. Then it came. "You still wearing that thing?" she asked, nodding toward Cassidy's uniform. Her tone was sugar. Her eyes were knives. Cassidy's stayed calm. "It's called service dress," she replied. "Military standard." Leona gave a soft laugh. "Sure, standard. Like a Halloween costume is standard on October 31st. Strike 1, muck the uniform." Cassidy didn't answer. Leona sipped her wine slow and elegant. Then she tilted the glass and murmured, "It's cute, really, the whole toy soldier thing." Cassidy turned her head, finally meeting her sister's eyes. Leona smiled, sweet and sharp. "Living off government pity, pretending it's patriotism? I mean, you've always been good at roles." Strike 2, question her dignity. Strike 3, smile while doing it. Cassidy said nothing. But her jaw tightened. Not because it hurt, because it was familiar. She'd heard that voice before, at family dinners, at graduations. In every moment, Leona needed to feel taller by standing on Cassidy's neck. And here they were. 30,000 feet in the air, and still, somehow, Cassidy was the one who couldn't breathe. She didn't need a knife. She had lawyers, sealed records, and a smile. And she used them all like scalpels. The plane had leveled out, the hum of the engines steady, the quiet between the sisters sharp. Leona sipped the last of her Chardonnay, tapped her screen twice, and turned slightly toward Cassidy, just enough to look like she was being polite. "You know you're not in the will anymore, right?" Cassidy didn't blink, didn't even turn. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Leona let out a sigh, theatrical, measured, cruel. "Oh, Cass, it's not personal. It's legal. The mental health clause." Cassidy's eyes narrowed. "What clause?" Leona smiled like she'd won the final round of a chess match she played alone. Beneficiaries with unresolved psychological evaluations can be deemed a risk to estate stability. I merely, advised the attorney. Cassidy's hands clenched. You read my file? She said, low, controlled. Technically, I shared it, Leona corrected, to protect the family's interest. The file, Syria, the 3 months of mandatory leave, the nightmares, the silence, the pills no one talked about, the evaluation she worked through, clawed through, survived, now weaponized, turned into a technicality. Leona didn't just erase her, she documented the erasure. Cassidy stared ahead past the clouds through the sky. This flight wasn't just a journey home. It was the final battlefield in a war she hadn't realized they were fighting. Some disasters don't start with an explosion. They begin with a whisper no one wants to hear. 27 minutes after takeoff, Cassidy's fingers were still tight on the armrest from her last exchange with Leona. The cabin was silent, too silent. Then, a sound, high-pitched, not loud, but wrong. It didn't belong on a plane cruising at 36,000 feet. Cassidy tilted her head. Leona was too busy replying to an email to notice. Flight attendants were serving tea like nothing happened. But Cassidy knew that sound. She'd heard it in briefings, in crash reconstructions, in every simulation they trained for, and prayed they'd never face. It was the whine of a compressor stall, an engine gasping not for fuel but for mercy. She unbuckled quietly, stood, walked toward the galley. She wasn't going to panic, not yet, but her heart had already started the countdown. And then, as she reached the aisle, the plane jolted. Not turbulence, not mild, a violent jerk, like the air had turned solid. Trays crashed, a baby cried. Leona's wine spilled into her lap. Cassidy didn't sit back down. She stepped toward the cockpit. Disaster doesn't knock. It rips the door off the hinges. The plane dropped. Not gradually, not politely. A sudden plunge like gravity just remembered who's in charge. Passengers screamed. Luggage bins burst open. Coffee carts tumbled and crashed into knees and shins. Then, thud, clang, screech. The cabin lights flickered. The seatbelt sign blinked wildly. And from above, a mechanical sound, click. Whoosh! Oxygen masks dropped like ghost hands from the ceiling. Cassidy grabbed hers instinctively, but her eyes weren't on the mask. They were on the cockpit door. This isn't turbulence. This is a system failure. Beside her, Leona was white with terror. No more smug, no more words. The cabin crew tried to shout over the chaos, but nobody could hear. The plane kept shaking, groaning like it was being torn from the sky. Cassidy stood, steady, focused, 100 lives behind her, a locked door in front, and maybe a chance to stop the fall. You think the cockpit is the heart of a plane, but when the heart flatlines, what's left? Cassidy slammed her fist against the cockpit door. No answer. She shouted through it. Still nothing. A flight attendant, red-faced, shaking, appeared with a key card. FAA override code, she muttered, barely audible over the screams behind them. Click. The door opened. And that's when she saw it. The captain, slumped in his seat, head back, face pale. A trickle of blood at his temple. Pulse weak. Breathing barely. The co-pilot was panicking, hands trembling, buttons blinking, alarm screaming in all directions, altitude drop, fuel pressure, compressor stall. Everything Cassidy had ever trained for screaming at once. The co-pilot turned to her. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't waste a second. Cassidy Wine, USAF retired, 1-200 flight hours. I'm not here to argue. Either you let me help or you kill 300 people by trying to be a hero alone. The co-pilot blinked. 1 beat. 2. And then he slid his hands off the yoke. From the forgotten daughter to the only one holding 300 lives in her hands, Cassidy didn't wait for permission. She slid into the left seat like it was made for her, because once it was. USAF flight simulator, desert storm drills, engine failures at 18,000 feet, those long nights, the sweat, the silence before impact. It all came rushing back. Click, switches flipped, hands moved like instinct. The co-pilot stared at her like she was some ghost in a uniform. But she didn't blink, she didn't shake, she flew. Altitude unstable, fuel leaking, engine 2 dead. "We're too heavy," she muttered, "and this runway, too short." But giving up wasn't an option. Not today. Not with screaming children in the back. Not with a plane that trusted her more than her own family did. Cassidy exhaled. "Wind 23 knots cross. I'll take flaps full, gear down, spoilers armed. I'm not landing this because I want to. I'm landing this because I have to." And in that moment, Cassidy Wynn stopped being the girl left out of a will and became the woman who willed 300 souls back to Earth. Some cockpits feel like command centers. This one felt like a coffin on fire. Red lights everywhere. Warning buzzers screamed like they were mourning the dead. Smoke curled from the control panel. Cassidy coughed once, then locked in. Engine 1 overheating. Engine 2 dead. Cabin pressure unstable. The yoke jerked left. Altitude dropped, and the smell of burning rubber filled the air like it was war again. The co-pilot frozen, mouth open, eyes wide. He wasn't trained for war. She was. Cassidy reached overhead, hands flying through emergency switches. Bleed air off. Hydraulics crossfeed. Fire bottle arm and discharge. Whoosh. A blast of suppressant gas filled the cockpit, smothering the smoke, but not the fear. Cassidy looked at the runway, barely a speck below. Too short, too fast, too late. No, not today. She pressed the comm. "Brace for impact. This is Cassidy Wynn. I have control. If you pray, now's the time." In the end, all the training fades. What's left is silence and instinct. Cassidy stared through the smoke-streaked windshield. The world blurred. Clouds, firelight, a runway somewhere below. Nothing was certain, except the feel of the yoke in her hands. Instructors never taught this. No simulator dared model it. But her body remembered. The left engine groaned. The landing gear rattled. The Boeing screamed through the air like a wounded beast. 1,000 feet, 750, flaps down, nose steady. The co-pilot reached for the checklist. "No," Cassidy snapped. "There's no time. I fly this by feel." And she meant it. Every nerve in her body lit up, not with fear, but with clarity. Hands hold firm. Eyes trust the horizon. Mind shut up and listen to the wind. Cassidy wasn't flying a plane. She was flying her father's silence, her sister's betrayal, her own worth. And she whispered, "Let's bring them home." The moment she gripped the yoke like it was an extension of her own heartbeat, Cassidy didn't just control the plane, she controlled the room. But not everyone could stand it. From the back of the cabin, Leona unbuckled with a snap. Her heels clicked down the aisle like punctuation marks. And then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's not a real pilot, she's just a glorified soldier. PTSD and drama. This is insane." The co-pilot didn't even look back. The head stewardess barely blinked. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. 300 passengers holding their breath. Every crew member glued to Cassidy's voice on the intercom. One voice, one command, one chance. Leona's words evaporated like steam on glass. No one defended Cassidy. But no one needed to. Because right then, the plane began to level, and everyone realized something Leona couldn't. The only thing flying them home was the woman she just tried to erase. The plane didn't know her name. It only knew the hands keeping it from falling. Cassidy squinted through the windscreen fog. Smoke, no lights, just a blur of gray and God. The runway was only 600 feet. The Boeing 777 needed 10,000. This wasn't landing. This was threading a needle on fire. 500 feet. Reverse thrust offline. Right engine dead. A voice from the control tower crackled, "Abort! Pull up! There's not enough!" But Cassidy didn't even flinch. "Too late! We're already home!" Her voice was calm, but her heart was counting down 5 seconds of borrowed time. 3. The wheels screamed. 2. The belly kissed concrete. 1. Sparks, metal, smoke, heat. Then, stillness. The cockpit lights flickered off. Silence blanketed the cabin. And then, applause. No, not yet. Just breath. Just life. And Cassidy didn't smile, didn't cry. She just whispered to the controls, "You did good." But the truth was, she did. Heroes make headlines, but Cassidy made enemies. She thought the runway was the end. She thought saving 300 lives would silence the whispers. But the moment the wheels stopped, the noise began. FAA agents boarded the plane before the passengers had even unbuckled. The press called it a rogue landing. The Department of Defense labeled it unauthorized aircraft intervention. Who gave you clearance? Did you have cockpit training on this model? Are you aware this constitutes a federal offense? She was asked more questions in 10 minutes than she'd been asked in her whole military exit interview. They didn't care she landed the plane. They cared she did it without asking. No medal, no thank you, just forms, subpoenas, and silence from the very family she saved. Cassidy had just performed a miracle, but America wanted her punished for it. It started with a smirk and ended with 30 million views. A video surfaced, grainy, shaky, captured by a teenage passenger on the tarmac. In it, Leona stood beside the emergency trucks, her designer coat spotless, her words sharp enough to cut steel. She's not a real pilot. She's just playing dress-up. Cassidy was still in the cockpit when those words were said, hands trembling. Shirt soaked in sweat, still trying to breathe. But now the internet was breathing for her. Hashtag she landed it. Hashtag not dress up. Hashtag Cassidy saved us. Celebrities reposted. Veterans spoke out. A senator tweeted, "If this is playing dress up, I hope my daughter grows up to play just like her." Within 12 hours, the FAA's tone changed. Within 24, Leona's name trended for all the wrong reasons. The pilot they tried to silence now had the world's microphone. She survived the skies, but now she was drowning on the ground. While the world was still talking about her landing, Leona had already moved to the next phase. Lawyers, press consultants, whispers in the right ears. A carefully crafted narrative began to circulate. Cassidy suffers from untreated PTSD. She experienced a dissociative break in flight. Hero or hazard? Talk shows ran segments. Psychologists were invited on air, none of whom had ever met Cassidy. They spoke with certainty. Textbook case of instability. Women under pressure often disassociate. Cassidy watched it all from a motel room. The headlines, the betrayal, and the worst part, no one, not even the FAA, defended her. Not yet. She had saved lives at 30,000 feet, but now her name was in free fall. Heroes don't need enemies to fall. All it takes is the silence of justice. They tried to bury her name with paperwork, so she fought back with paperwork of her own. Cassidy didn't call the press. She didn't tweet. She didn't cry on camera. Instead, she walked into a quiet law office in Virginia and dropped a folder on the desk. Inside, copies of her father's original will, handwriting samples, military clearance logs, and a hunch she couldn't ignore. The lawyer looked over the documents and stopped cold. This signature? It's been forged. Even worse, her confidential medical records, psychological evaluations from a mission in Syria had been accessed by someone without clearance and traced right back to a law firm with a familiar name on the door, Leona Everhart. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a premeditated takedown of her career, her credibility, her right to even exist in the family name. But now Cassidy had proof, and the silence was about to break. She thought it was airtight. But Cassidy found the leak and the whole web unraveled. The investigation moved quickly once Cassidy's lawyers submitted the evidence to the federal authorities. Within days, subpoenas were flying, and Leona Everhart, once the darling of Everhart Capital, was now the name on every federal investigator's whiteboard. The discovery: 6 shell companies, all registered to vacant offices in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Each one had funneled trust assets over the years, money meant for Cassidy and other family members, back into Leona's private accounts, millions, hidden behind offshore fronts, false names, and non-existent boards. The kicker? Cassidy's share of the family trust had been redirected 2 weeks after her father's stroke, when he was unconscious. It wasn't just fraud, it was exploitation of a dying man. The story hit the media like wildfire. The woman who mocked Cassidy as unstable was now being questioned for felony fraud, wire transfers, and trust manipulation. And Cassidy? She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just handed over more files and let the truth do the talking. 1 envelope, 5 signatures, 3 security clearances. That's all it took to set fire to a dynasty built on lies. Cassidy walked up the steps of the federal building in D.C. Not as a soldier, not as a daughter, but as a citizen with proof. Inside that envelope were official trust amendments with forged timestamps, server logs showing unauthorized access to her classified records, a notarized confession from a whistleblower paralegal, Leona's ex-assistant. The FBI opened an immediate inquiry. By noon, the SEC was involved. By 3 p.m., Everhart Capital stock had dropped 17%. And by evening, every news outlet in America had a new headline: Decorated vet ousted from family fortune uncovers multi-million-dollar fraud. But it wasn't the scandal that shook the nation. It was the footage. Someone leaked airport security video, Leona sneering, calling Cassidy government charity, mocking her PTSD, and dismissing her as a fake pilot. The internet erupted. Veterans groups, pilots, military moms, whistleblowers, they rallied. Cassidy didn't just land a plane. She just grounded a monster. Cassidy didn't destroy Leona with power. She did it with the one thing Leona couldn't buy: the truth. The board of Everhart Capital met in emergency session. It lasted 23 minutes. At minute 12, Leona walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys. At minute 15, they told her she was being suspended without pay. At minute 23, her keycard stopped working. Her name was stripped from the firm's masthead. Her corner office was emptied before sunset. The portrait in the executive hall taken down and replaced with a blank wall. And the world turned its back. Major publications retracted glowing profiles. Speaking events canceled. A major fashion brand dropped her as a face of modern elegance. Even her alma mater declined to invite her for commencement. But the worst, her daughter Elise unfollowed her on every platform and posted "Truth, blood, I stand with integrity." Cassidy never said a word to the press. She didn't need to. The silence was louder than Leona's entire empire. Not all scars fade, but some grow wings. Cassidy didn't cash the settlement. She built something no inheritance could buy: Wind Flight Academy. A modest hangar, second-hand flight simulators, desks with initials carved into the wood, and a waiting list of girls who had been told their dreams were too loud, too risky, or too masculine. They came from foster care, small towns, combat rehab, juvenile halls, and homes where "you're just a girl" echoed in every wall. And Cassidy, she greeted each one personally, not as a war hero, not as the woman who landed the plane, but as the girl once told she didn't belong in the sky. "Welcome to Wind Flight," she'd say. "Your wings were never the problem. The world just couldn't see them yet." It was a Tuesday, nothing special. A light breeze, sky clear, planes taking off every 40 minutes. Then came the knock. Not loud, not desperate, just certain. Cassidy opened the hangar door, and there she was, Elise Everhart, hair in a braid, no makeup, jeans, flight logbook clutched like a lifeline. "I'm not here to fix her name," Elise said, eyes steady. "I'm here to earn my own." For a long second, Cassidy said nothing. The woman who once landed a flaming jet was now just a teacher. And the daughter of her enemy was now just a girl who wanted to fly. Cassidy stepped aside. "Then let's see what kind of wings you've got. No revenge, no lecture, just a runway and a chance. Because sometimes the final victory is not in taking someone down, but in lifting up the one thing they never taught: humility." Cassidy sat across from Elise in the hangar's tiny interview room, just 2 chairs, 1 flickering light, and a coffee stain no one ever bothered to clean. "You know," Cassidy began slowly, "this place was built for the girls who were told, 'You don't belong,' not the daughters of the ones who said it." Elise nodded. She didn't plead, didn't explain, just pulled out a notebook, flight equations scribbled everywhere, logged hours from private simulators, and a drawing a plane with the word freedom on the tail. "I studied, trained, saved every dollar I could, not to be her legacy, but to rewrite my own." Cassidy leaned back, took a breath, and smiled. "Then you'll be admitted not because of your last name, but because you flew here with no wings." She stamped the form. Admitted. In that moment, Cassidy didn't just teach aviation. She taught the world. It's not blood that makes a legacy. It's the courage to earn your seat in the sky. No applause, no headlines, just the wind whistling through the hangar as a young girl climbed into a Cessna for her first solo flight. Cassidy stood by the runway, hands in her pockets, eyes tracking the sky. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Leona, not to the media, not even to her father's memory. Someone else was in the air now, someone she gave a chance, not because of who they were, but because of who they chose to become. The little plane lifted, wobbled, then steadied. "Good," Cassidy whispered. "Now hold it, feel it, trust it. No need for revenge, no press conference, no spotlight. Just peace. Revenge is not a scream, it's a runway. And flying higher than the people who once clipped your wings, that's the real victory. You don't need to scream to prove your worth. You don't need revenge to reclaim your place. Sometimes the most powerful way to win is to rise so silently they can't reach you anymore." Cassidy didn't need applause. She didn't need to shout she was capable. She built a runway not just for herself, but for every girl who was told, "You can't." Because legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we choose to build, even with broken parts. If this story moved you, if you believe the quiet ones deserve to fly too, hit that subscribe button. Because here, we tell stories that soar, stories that don't just end, they transform. Subscribe. Let your screen be the runway for voices that almost got silenced.